I'm Lynn Lustig, and welcome back to A Satisfying End, where I go through various kinds of stories and see how satiating they are based only on their ending. Well, mostly on their ending. This time, we're doing The Good Place. This show is amazing, by the way, so if you haven't seen it, stop watching this, because all the spoilers are ahead, and go watch it. And then hopefully come back and see this, because otherwise, I just chased away a viewer, which is so smart for a YouTuber. Ta-da! I like to go over a couple of different things based on a rubric that I have been slowly building with some of your help. The rubric is linked below, with the idea being that you can leave a comment about what you think does or doesn't work, and new items that either need to be added or taken away in order for us to understand from a more academic point of view what makes an ending that much better. So part of the problem, of course, is that a lot of art is subjective, so it's really difficult to have some kind of universal, but the idea here is to at least get an idea of what may be possible, depending on the genre. So let's get going on that. In the rubric, I tend to have 4 primary categories. I have story structure, I have character, I have genre expectations, and I have grumbles. Generally things that were close but didn't quite make it for me. As far as story structure goes, this show is on point. So there tends to be a 4-piece structure to a 3-act structure, which makes no sense, except for it's Act 1, the first part of Act 2, the second part of Act 2, and Act 3. I don't know why it's broken up that way. It just is, guys. So the nice thing about The Good Place is it already is broken up into 4s for you. So it has 4 seasons, and at the end of each season, it falls right on where it needs to with the story structure. So the end of Act 1, we should know who the antagonist is. That's right where we figure out that we have the bad place. It's actually acting behind all of this. And Michael has just revealed with his evil laugh that he is, of course, a part of that.
This is the bad place.
At the midpoint, we figure out that the point system actually isn't working and that humans can continue to increase their points even after death.
Please explain to me what the
They get sent back to Earth and we change the game. We give them a second chance. So perfect. This should be the place where something changes everything. Learning about those points changes the entire system. At the end of Act 2, this is where we have the primary characters able to go through and remake the original neighborhood with the intent of putting new people through it and trying to see if they can indeed change their scores. However, once we get there, once they're about to roll things out, we run into some problems. The first is, of course, that Michael has a panic attack and Eleanor has to take over, having no idea what she's doing. The second is then when she has to have Chidi put into the system and he has to give up his memories. We're going to talk about that in another minute. Then we come to the whole point of this, which is the climax. So at the very last bit of action, the last piece of that tension that's going to build, we have the confrontation between the good place and the bad place, and the judge to some degree. She's acting as the antagonistic force for this piece, but the bad place still in general is the issue. So when Michael has to go and try and compromise with the head demon guy that I've already forgotten his name of, that is the moment where we have the 2 major powers having their face-off. This isn't so much like in a epic fantasy or in an adventure where they're gonna like fisticuff it out. This is a really neat version in the heroine's journey of finding the compromise, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute as well.
How do you not have another plan? You've always had another plan.
What's wrong, Sean?
Some pieces that then make the ending even better than just following story structure is to make sure that you've seeded it correctly. So we want those callbacks to the first act. And in this case, I'm just going to focus on the little thing because it's so cute. But in the retirement episode in the first season, Michael talks about how he has never had a membership card and how he wants to be able to say, take it sleazy.
Any rewards card. I wanted to talk briefly to someone and then say, take it sleazy.
But if you recall then, in the very last episode, the very last scene, that's what he does. He gets his membership card and tells the guy to take it sleazy. 2 important don'ts on a proper series ending, or at least story full ending, is to avoid cliffhangers. Cliffhanger just means you haven't finished the story. This is not the same as story hooks that then are new pieces of information to drag you into a next series, next chapter, next book. Those are totally different. A cliffhanger is just leaving the story off without any answers. It's very unsatisfying. The next is a Deus Ex Machina, which I talked about last time. It is the last minute someone swooped in at random and fixed the problem, and the characters didn't have anything to do with it, and now the story's over. Also not good. Very unsatisfying. We want the ending to have a few little surprises, nothing totally out of left field, but just those sweet little things. For example, in this one, Tahani deciding instead of moving through that final gate, she wants to become an architect. And at the same time, we have Michael, who has spent his most of the entire show really admiring and trying to understand humans. He's given the chance to then become human for a time and live on Earth. And I just can't believe like they're taking this giant squid demon thing and shoving him into a squishy human body and then just being like, and Earth. We need to make sure that the plot questions are answered, so whether or not they belong in the good place, whether or not, they can defeat the bad place, if they can make this experiment work, things like that. And of course, they are all answered by the end. We're not left with any particular dangling questions, with the exception of what happens when they move through that final gateway in the woods. But it's implied that, they are rejoining the particles of the universe, so I'm going to go with that. The story remains consistent with its theme, so it's very lighthearted, it's very absurdist, it's a lot of fun, but they're also able to temper it with some of the more serious issues. And I think that that is really brilliant when we can handle that balance well. There's an old saying of make them happy to make them sad, but in this case, the intent is a comedy. It's supposed to make them laugh and make people happy the whole way through. But to really have that hold the most punch, you gotta remind people there's that little hint of drama too. And this one did it really well. I mean, if you weren't crying in this show, what is wrong with you? I'm kidding. Nothing's wrong with you. One little final piece is just continuity. Making sure that they're staying consistent with the characters' backstories, that we're staying with motivations, even small pieces like Janet when Jason says, "Hey girl," and she goes, "Not a girl." Little things like that. That continuity really matters, especially when you have people that watch a show over and over again, like myself. So you want to make sure that that maintains that consistency. My next piece of the rubric is genre expectations. So this one's a little strange. I don't normally have a lot of experience in comedies and sitcoms, because technically this is a sitcom. But because this has an overarching plot, it changes the game a little bit, and I'm really excited by that. So in a way, it still kind of fits the conventions of fantasy and romance, which, hi, that's what I do. So I'm pleased to say it does have the classic happily ever after for romance, where everybody's together for as long as they want to be. And then it also has the fantasy completing of the quest. They completed the goal, they defeated the bad guy. But the journey was a heroine's journey, not a hero's journey. The difference being that Eleanor, as the heroine, she's collecting people around her and making these kind of safe places. So she's getting this home to be kind of their home base, and then, creating the good place into the actual good place instead of this kind of blah land of constant pleasure. I mean, that just sounds terrible. Versus the hero's journey, where we have typically one single character that's going up against a bunch of bad things. Everything's been taken from them, and they're going on some kind of revenge or ultimate showdown style. You see that a lot in classic action films and most media, because they really push the hero's journey. And I don't get why. Heroines' journeys tend to be far more satisfying. Keep that in mind. Another fun thing about this show is, since it is in the comedy realm, it tends to have more of an ensemble cast. So everybody has their part to play. Everyone has an important key that without it, they wouldn't be able to reach the end goal. And it's neat to see them all work together. I mean, even Jason has a key. So when they are doing the test of the new neighborhood, where they can have new humans come through, test their point system, there is a time when Janet has been taken over by bad Janet, and Jason does the whole, "Hey girl," and she just goes, "Hi." And he's like, "What?" And figures out that bad Janet has taken the place of Janet. in an attempt to
Crud nuts.
ruin the whole experiment. Sabotage the whole experiment. Moving on, we have character next. Character is one of my favorite things. It's also one of the most difficult things. Like, you think plotting is hard? Like, plotting is interesting. Characters take your whole brain. So, I'm always really impressed when they can do a character correctly, or at least in a really compelling manner. I guess there's no correct way other than having them rounded and not flat. So we want to make sure that we understand our character motivations. This goes both for the antagonist and for the protagonist. So Eleanor, in this case, she's motivated because she doesn't want to go to the bad place and be tortured for eternity. Wow, didn't see that coming. I don't want to either. And then we have the antagonist, so the entire bad place that, of course, wants to maintain the status quo because they've been torturing forever, and that's what they do, and so they don't want to give that up. That makes sense to me. You gotta hold on to what you want. With characters, it's really important that we talk about character growth. In this show, it is exceptionally easy. You want to see character growth as an example? Watch The Good Place. The entire point of the story is the character growth. This is why they're in the ethics classes. This is why they start out as these really horrible people. You look at Eleanor and her time on Earth and like, oh man, nuh-uh. But you see her then through the course of the series and she starts becoming more invested in the people around her. She even makes some sacrifices to stay with them, like when she was the only one that passed the test from the judge. And she just becomes a pretty darn good person. And so that's really neat to see. And they do it in a very incremental and intentional way. You can watch it the entire way through and just see piece by piece how she changes. And the other characters are not immune to that. They all have their changes as well, especially Michael. I think he's the other character that probably changes the most throughout the entire series. And he was very just heartwarming to watch find his place with them. Each of the characters, because of their character growth throughout the series, has learned enough that when it comes to the big kerfluffles at the end, they're able to figure out the key. They can solve the problem because they have gone through that character growth. If you had thrown first episode Eleanor in at the end, no, wouldn't have worked. She wouldn't have been able to get into the good place. She wouldn't have been able to fix the good place. None of that would have happened. So it's important that your characters make a change that directly contributes to how the climax and how the story turns out. On the rubric, I also mentioned that we need to care about the characters, and I'm sorry, if you weren't crying at the end, let's just say I was like ugly snot crying. It wasn't pretty, but it was just so good, guys. Throughout the series, everyone uses the skills they've got. So whether that's their knowledge of ethics, their ability to talk style and drop names, their kind of absurdist logic, we have Eleanor's heart. All these things come into play, but mostly the skills they're using are Janet as their kind of intergalactic, I know all, and I'm your primary like help point. And then there's Michael, and we use his ties in the bad place to then go down to the portal, get to the judge, free Janet when she gets trapped down there, all kinds of things. So we need those connections as well. Characters need to have sacrificed something to make the end, kind of bittersweet. That's how we know that they had to fight for it. When they've had to give something up, that means that it was hard for them to get there, and that makes it that much more satisfying when we see them conquer something that was really difficult for them. The best example of this is when Chidi decides to give up his memories and be reinserted into the system. And Eleanor, of course, goes along with it. They're both sacrificing their relationship for the greater good. And that scene also made me cry. Apparently, I'm just a crybaby, and I don't care.
I know you're deflecting by making jokes about how hot you
It's
are.
not a joke. I'm a legit snack.
That scene also was a great example of showing vulnerability, because they were very upset to lose each other. However, my favorite scene for showing vulnerability actually comes when Eleanor was back on Earth and they're trying to reconnect with the people around them to help them get into the good place and improve their points. And she goes to her mother. Her mother has changed drastically from what Eleanor remembers. And in doing so, Eleanor doubts herself. She gets upset because she sees if her mother was able to change, it meant she was able to change this whole time, but it meant that she wasn't willing to change for Eleanor. And that's her perspective of it, and she tells that to Michael, and it's a fallacy, but it is heart-wrenching. And relatable. Since readers and viewers get really invested in side characters, it's a really good idea to make sure that they have a rounded story as well. We're obviously not spending a whole lot of time on them. They are a little bit in the background, sometimes a little more forward than not, but we want to make sure that they get their ending as well. So take Mindy St. Clair. She was in the medium place. She's just kind of ready to be there for all of time. It's fine. But Eleanor at the end convinces her that when Tahani has become a full architect, that Mindy will go through the system. And that's her method of completing that story for Mindy. And the final segment, Grumbles. I have very few because this show's amazing. I did some digging online to see what other people thought about the ending of the show. And really, one of the only complaints I saw was about the LGBT representation. They only had one gay couple that was a stereotypical, effeminate male-male couple. And that was, no one was trying very hard there. However, Eleanor is clearly bi, and as someone that really wants to see more of that representation out there, that made me very happy. It's not clearly like, I am bi stated, she's not wearing like a plaque or something, but I mean, she's constantly hitting on Tahani and has a total thing with Chidi's girlfriend at one of the moments. And so I'm happy with that. Like, I don't have any complaints there. One final, last little thing. If you can make your audience laugh, if you can make them cry, you are that much closer to giving them that satisfying end. Because that kind of catharsis is so necessary in people, especially when we're in this world where expressing emotions isn't always encouraged. So having that outlet, thank you, creators. It's necessary. That's it for The Good Place on this episode. Make sure and check below if you want to look at that rubric, maybe add something, leave a note in the comments. If you aren't subscribed, hit that thing, do that bell thing. There's probably some other buttons. Just turn it into DDR. It'll be fun. And thanks for joining me this week. Let me know if you want another story, series, books, any of that looked at for doing in my next video. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.